All right, welcome to week 2 of the CAD class. Last week we created an account in Onshape and got the team set up and all of the add-ins and things. This week we're going to jump into some of the actual modeling. Um, so we're going to start right at the beginning of the process here. You're going to go to cad.onshape.com. Last week we kind of went through some links when we created our account, and I didn't actually go over what the web address is. If you go to just onshape.com, you got to click through to get to the actual CAD. But if you just go to cad.onshape.com, you'll get your sign in. You click sign in, it'll take you right to the main screen. So if you are a RoboChargers member, you can just go to Teams and go to RoboChargers. If you're not on the RoboChargers, you can go to whatever folder structure you have in place that you have been using for the CAD class. We are going to go to the 2122 folder, go to CAD class, find your name, and then what I have done here is I have created a document for this week. Each week, what you're going to do is you're going to go up here to click create, you're going to click document, you're going to give it a name, and then click OK. In this case, I have pre-created it for this week. There are some weeks where you are going to use a document across 2 weeks. I mentioned this last week, but those I'll give you guys a heads up on the first week of those projects that'll be a 2-week project, and then the second week you shouldn't create a different document. You're just going to continue working. So we'll probably give it a name like weeks 5 and 6 or whatever. So for now, once you created the document, you click on it, or it'll open automatically when you create it, and you're presented with the interface that we talked about last week. So we're going to talk about kind of some of the basic first things that you're going to do whenever you create a model. We're going to talk about it a little bit, demonstrate it, show you guys a few little things, and then we're actually going to continue it next week because there's some more complicated things to understand before we really get into creating more complicated models. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be in a part studio. Now it creates one automatically for us. So that's fine. We can go ahead and delete this assembly if we want to. You can just leave it there or delete it. Doesn't matter. We're not going to be using it. So we're going to create this part studio, or we're going to use this part studio that's already created for us. And we are going to create what is called a sketch. Now, what is a sketch? A sketch is a 2D drawing, basically, made up of lines and squares and circles and arcs and other curves that basically makes what is called a profile, or you can think of it as an outline. And then we use that kind of outline to form 3D shapes. What exactly that means will become pretty obvious here in a second. But so I'm going to show you how to create a sketch. Now I mentioned that a sketch is 2D. And that's crucial. So a sketch is placed on a flat surface. Now, when you first start a part studio, you don't have any flat surfaces to create sketches on. Later on, once you have a model in place, you can create a sketch on any flat surface. But to start, you only have these planes here. Now, these we're going to talk about what these are exactly. A little later on in the class, not this week. We're going to talk about it in a future week. However, these are just planes, and these are part of the origin of the model. So this little dot right here is like the 0, 0, 0 coordinate. You can see that what the coordinates are down here in the corner. You can see it's a bunch of zeros. And so this kind of central point is what you're going to base your model off of. I'll talk about that here in a second. So what we're going to do for now is we're going to create a sketch by going up here and clicking on this sketch button. If this doesn't show up for you, maybe if you have a different size monitor or something, you can always go to the search tools and search in here and then click on it. So you're gonna hit sketch. This is a little dialog that pops up. You can move this window around if you want, but I find it helpful to leave it up here in this corner. You're going to need to get used to these dialogues. A lot of tools in Onshape use these dialogues. Basically, whenever you see these little boxes that are highlighted blue, or sometimes they won't be highlighted blue, these are asking for you to click on something on the screen. And when it's highlighted blue, that means whatever you click on will get put into this box. If it's not highlighted blue, you would need to click on it before then clicking something in the viewport over here. So it's asking us for a sketch plane. We've got 3 planes to choose from. I'm just going to click the front plane. You'll notice it creates this kind of like ghost of a box around it, and that is showing the sketch itself, which is kind of a plane in and of itself. Now, one thing that I always struggled with when I first started with Onshape is it's very tempting to click this green check mark, but as long as you want to edit the sketch, this dialog box needs to stay open. That's different from the way that SolidWorks or Inventor works, and so it's kind of tempting to just get this box out of your way, but then that exits the sketch. So while you're working on the sketch, you can move the box out of the way if you want to, or just deal with it. Because we're working on a 2D drawing, I find it helpful to click on the face that the sketch is facing and look on it square on instead of being at an angle. Also, these planes that are here are kind of annoying once you start modeling, so I like to hide them. And the way you do that is you go over here to the feature tree. Remember, we talked about the feature tree last week. And you can see top, front, and right. These are the planes that are labeled here in the viewport. You can also see the origin up at the top. This is that dot. I generally like to keep the origin dot visible if at all possible. We're just going to hide the planes, and you do that by just hovering over it with your mouse and then clicking on this little eyeball to toggle visibility. And then if you ever want to come back and show them again, you can come back and click it and it'll show back up. And that's true of anything. You can do that for sketches, you can do that for parts, you can do that for anything. You just hover over it and you click the little eyeball to show or hide it. So we're going to go back to looking at this square on. And then when you're in a sketch, right, you can obviously zoom and pan around like we talked about last week. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some shapes. Up here at the top, you can see there's a bunch of buttons that represent different shapes. Simplest one's probably a circle. Some of the buttons have these little drop-down arrows beside that have a few different versions of the shape you're creating. You can see we can create a center point circle, we can create a 3-point circle, we can create an ellipse, which is kind of like a circle, but you know it's just lumped into the same category. You can see we can create a rectangle, or we can create rectangles using several different methods. It kind of takes a little getting used to, like what some of these options actually do. But generally speaking, I find myself using like a lot of these, right? There's some programs where like there might be options like this in like Photoshop or something where like you wouldn't use it very often, but I find myself using these sketch options pretty frequently. So it's a good idea to get used to them is basically what I'm saying. But for now, we're just going to start with the basics. So if I take a circle and I click on this, now basically what this does is activates the circle tool. Now if I want to get out of the circle tool, I can press the escape button on my keyboard, top left corner usually if you're not used to using that. And I can click on a different tool and then hit escape, and it'll exit out of the tool. I can also click on the circle tool and then click on the rectangle tool and it'll switch tools, right? So getting used to like understanding which tool is currently active is going to be a big part of not getting lost in CAD. It's very easy when you've got like a whole bunch of tools and stuff to like forget which mode you're in and get confused or frustrated because, this is not acting the way that you expect it to. So it's a good idea to keep track of which tool you're in. It's a good habit to get into. When you're done with a tool, just smack the escape button. Basically, anytime something's happening on the screen that you don't want to happen, you can just like tap the escape button, press it a bunch of times if you need to. Whatever you need to do, you just hit the escape button. It'll take you back to this kind of default state where you just have your mouse cursor floating around. And when you just have the mouse cursor, all you're doing is selecting. So it's kind of like the select tool, right? But it's not specifically a tool. It's just, what is going on when you don't have any other tool selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the circle, and then I can click anywhere on the screen. Now, one thing that's very important, I am not clicking and dragging. Everything I'm about to do, I'm not going to click and drag. I am clicking a single point, and then I'm moving my mouse around. I am not holding the mouse button down right now. That throws a lot of new users off, where they expect to need to click and drag, and it's not click and drag. It's 2 clicks. So then you can see I've placed the center point of the circle, and then I'm moving the circle around. You can see this like number changing. This is the diameter of the circle in inches because that's the units I have set by default. And then if I want to finish off this circle, I got to click again, and I can click again, and you could see it kind of turns solid and it fills it in this like light gray color. Now, I also have an option to where if I have a size that I know that I want this circle, I can type it in now, and then it'll lock the circle to that size. But I'm going to explain a little bit more about how that works a little later. So for now, I'm going to hit escape. And then we can also create a rectangle. Same deal. You click once, you move your mouse around, you click again to place it down. We can just keep placing rectangles all day long if we want to. Whatever. So let's talk about, before we go any farther, let's talk about selection. So I'm going to escape out of this tool. In Onshape, which is a little different from a lot of other CAD programs and just general graphics programs, Onshape you click, and then if you click another thing, the thing you clicked first stays selected, and it just adds the second one to a selection. So if you're used to selecting things in Windows, for example, you're used to selecting one thing and then selecting a second thing, and the second thing is selected and the first thing is deselected, right? You can only have like one thing selected at a time. And if you want to select multiple things, you're supposed to hold like Control or Shift and click on multiple things. In Onshape, you just keep clicking and it keeps adding things to your selection. That takes a little bit of getting used to. I think in general, I would say that after you get used to it, it does actually end up saving you time because you don't have to like constantly be tapping and holding and stuff on the Control key or the Shift key. You can just click. The one thing that's a little bit weird is trying to get it to deselect. Excuse me. You can press the space bar and it will deselect. That I find to be a little bit unwieldy. Clicking in the white space is like just anywhere on the viewport that's not something else. That works as well, but I find that's very inconsistent. Like right now, it's selecting it, doing a single click, but sometimes you have to click twice or 3 times. It's just generally pretty inconsistent. So generally speaking, I click in the white space, but sometimes that doesn't isn't very responsive. So spacebar also works. In addition, you can window select. So if I click and drag, you can see this box. This is similar to selecting on Windows or anything like this. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen the way that this works. Now, one thing that I want to highlight, and this is pretty common across CAD programs, you can see if I select, it doesn't matter bottom to top, but if I select first on the left and then move to the right, you can see the box is blue. But if I move to the left instead, you can see the box is yellow. That is important. When I'm moving to the right like this and the box is blue, it will select only things that are completely inside the box. So you can see I'm overlapping these 2 vertical lines here that are part of the rectangle, but this bottom one is completely contained within the box, and so it selects the bottom line. Now, if I wanted to select everything the box touches, I have to go the other way. I have to go right to left. So I can start over here and select right to left, and you'll notice it selects the vertical lines. That is very important. It won't take it very long before this becomes muscle memory of which way to go. Having both of those modes available to you is super useful when you start getting into complicated sketches and things. This is also not only true in sketches. This is just generally anytime you're in an assembly, you're in a part studio, you're in a drawing, you're in a sketch, whatever environment that you're in Onshape, that left to right and right to left thing stays true. So what we're going to do now, we're actually just going to window select everything, and then I'm going to press the delete key just to kind of get rid of it. Let's talk about a couple other things here. So let's talk about this rectangle here. If I click randomly out in the white space over here maybe, and I click twice and then press escape, you'll notice that the lines are blue. And you can hover over them and they change color, but the lines are blue when you're not interacting with it. You'll notice the corners are also blue. And if I click and drag on the corner, you can notice I move it around. Now, it might be a little surprising to you because we talked about, parametric versus non-parametric and how that works in the first week of the class. And it's supposed to be based on dimensions and all this stuff, right? But I just go in here and click and drag and move stuff around. And that sounds more like direct modeling. And if I didn't do anything with this, this would be more like direct modeling. However, there is something called constraints. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about what constraints actually are next week, but constraints are essentially a general group of geometric rules that you impose on your model, and they have to follow. And you'll notice if I hover over some things, there are these little like tiles that show up. These are just indicators of constraints that already exist. And there's things like parallel and perpendicular and all of that stuff. And when you create this rectangle, it automatically creates those for you. However, I don't really want to get bogged down into those because I want to get over some even more basic stuff. So we'll talk about those next week, and we'll kind of go into the weeds on those. Those are very important. You got to get used to. So for now, we're going to just kind of hit on some more basic stuff. So right now, anything that's blue is what's called unconstrained, right? It doesn't have enough constraints to lock it into a position on the screen. And it's pretty important that, I say pretty, it's of the utmost importance that everything in your model be constrained by the time you're done, right? You can have unconstrained geometry while you're working on it, but by the time I finish this sketch, by the time I'm done with it, everything on this screen should be constrained. So let's talk about what that looks like. Let's delete this rectangle here, and let's go up and create a new rectangle. And what I'm going to do is, instead of clicking in the white space, I'm going to hover over this this central origin dot. Now I want you to pay close attention to what is actually happening with the little icons and colors and displays that are showing up around my cursor, because all of this stuff is actually very, very important. So if I get straight above or straight beside, you'll notice the dot turns yellow and I get this dotted line. Now this means that if I place this rectangle down, you can see the little horizontal bar that's kind of like to the lower right of my cursor. If I go above, it's a vertical bar. Basically what it's telling me is it is going to create a horizontal constraint relative to the origin. And so that means that when I place this corner of this rectangle down, and I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to escape out, it is locking the first point I placed, which is this corner, to be horizontal to the origin point. And you'll notice that the top line of this rectangle is now black. When geometry turns black, that means it is fully constrained. That means it's locked down. Now you'll notice that the two corner points are still blue. The line itself is black, which means it can't move perpendicular to itself, but the corner points can still move left and right, which you can see if I click and drag, I can move it, right? But if I try to click and drag on the line, it won't let me move it. It's just wanting to select. So if I click and drag on the bottom, I can move it up and down. Here I can move it up and down. But if I click and drag on the top, it just wants to select, and then I have to deselect or whatever. Let's go one step farther. Let's delete that and let's create a new rectangle, and let's actually get a little closer to the dot. Now you'll notice if I'm off on an angle, I don't get these dotted lines or anything. There's nothing at 45. It's just vertical and horizontal. But if I get very close, you'll notice, like if I basically right on top of it, you can see this little yellow like square that shows up around the dot. That means that I am going to create what's called a coincident constraint. Not super important what that means, but basically you can just think of it as I'm going to attach the corner point of the rectangle to the origin point. So if I click while this little square box shows up, and you'll notice, it looks like the rectangle is attached to that corner, which is good. I can go out here and click again and then press escape. You'll notice this dot is black, this line is black, and this line is black. So that means that if I click and drag on these, I can't move any of them. I can still move these corners, I can still move this corner, but I can't move these. This corner is locked to the origin. Now, when you're modeling, typically the first thing you need to do in the first sketch that you create is you need to lock something to the origin. If you don't have geometry locked to the origin and it's just floating around in space, you can't fully constrain it, or it's difficult to fully constrain it. And having non-fully constrained geometry is very bad for a parametric model, because what will happen is you'll build this complicated model, and you'll change something about the model, and because of the model's parametric nature, it will go through and recalculate all the geometry for the model. And then if you have unconstrained geometry, you don't know what the solver will do with that geometry, and it basically will do something that a lot of CAD people call exploding, right? Your lines will just like, it'll just like freak out, and it'll throw your rectangle way off to the side, and it'll be some strange shape, and it'll be floating off in space where you don't want it to be. So it's very important to lock everything down and attach stuff to the origin one way or the other. And there's a lot of different ways to do that depending on what you're modeling. And as we go through the CAD class, you'll get a better sense of kind of what are some methods for doing that. But this one right here, where you're taking a rectangle or a circle or whatever, and you're attaching it to the origin, that's one of the most common. And we can do the same thing with the circle, like I just mentioned. Click the circle, click the center point, click the diameter, hit escape. You can't really see that it's attached, but if I click and drag on this, I can resize the circle, but I can't move the circle off the origin at all. Whereas if I create a circle over here, this central dot is blue. I can click and drag and move the circle around, or I can resize the circle. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create a rectangle. Now, what I want to do is go ahead and create this rectangle. I'm going to press escape, and this rectangle is not fully constrained, so we need to fully constrain it. So I'm going to introduce to you one type of constraint. There are other constraints, like I mentioned, but I'm going to introduce you to one type, and then we are going to work with that for this week, and then next week we'll cover the rest. So what we're looking for here is the dimension tool. You can click on it on the bar, search for it, or press the D key to activate it, which is what I just did. Now, what this does is this dimensions the size of an element on the screen or the distance between two elements. So if I click on a line, that was a single click. I'm not dragging, I'm not clicking and holding. I'm not touching my mouse button right now. You'll notice these arrows and this text is like following me around the screen. The object that I'm creating right now is effectively a label that's just showing me what dimension this is, and then I can change the dimension, and it'll change the length of the line. But right now, what I'm actually placing is the text that actually displays the number. This is one of the big things that throws people off, new CAD users off. They don't understand, this is not muscle memory, and they don't really get what they're supposed to do with this number. You're supposed to put this number on the screen in a way that looks nice, right? Don't do this. This looks like crap. Don't do this. It's way, where it doesn't need to be. If this were a smaller dimension, you could put it off to the side. Don't stick it way out here. Don't put it on the inside unless you don't have anything else on the inside, right? Put it in a nice way where it's kind of nicely spaced off to the side and it's readable. Now, as you zoom in and out, this will change, but kind of generally speaking with your sketch, you should kind of have a general distance that you're viewing it from in terms of zooming in and out. So what you're going to do is you're going to click and place it again. And you'll notice this turns into a text box. I can edit this text in here. I can click and select, and I can backspace, and I can edit. So let's type something in here. If I type a number 2, this will default to inches. So this is 2 inches. I can also type IN for inches. I could also type mm for millimeters or a single m for meters, and you'll get some of these little tool tips showing up that are specified, that show that you're using supported units. I can also type in feet, whatever you want to do, but type in 2 inches, or if it's your default unit, just type in the number. And then what you're going to do is you're going to press enter. Now you notice the rectangle changed size. Now we still have the dimension tool active. So we clicked on a line and it dimensioned the length of the line. That's great. But what if we want to dimension the distance between 2 lines? So to set the width of this rectangle, we could just click on this top line and dimension the top line. But there's a different way to do it, and they're equally valid. Sometimes you don't have a line that you need to that you can dimension the length of to set the distance between 2 sides of some shape. So what you can do is you can click on one, and it'll start creating the label like it did before. But I don't have to click to place the text down. I can click on another piece of geometry. I can click on another line over here. Now you'll notice it's dimensioning between the two. Now I still need to place my label down. I could do this. This is kind of ugly. It's way more spread out than it needs to be. Don't place it up here. You know, don't place it in the middle. Just gonna place it down like up here a little bit. Now what I want this to be is I want this to be you know, a rectangle. I don't want it to be a square, so I'm gonna type in a different dimension. I'm gonna type in 3. And I can type in decimals. And actually you can type in small equations in here too. So you can type in like 3 plus 0.5 or something, and you can type in little equations in here and it'll solve the equations for you. We'll go into that a little more next week, but that's a thing as well. So I'm gonna press enter and this will create the dimension and the rectangle will resize. I'm gonna press escape to exit out of the dimension tool. And you'll notice that this has all turned black. I can't click and drag on any of this stuff and actually move it. That means that this is locked down. This is fully constrained. And if you want to come back and clean these up, you can click and drag on these to move them around. That's great. So we're done with the sketch for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the check box and close it. And you'll notice the dimensions go away, but I can still see the geometry. And that's something that Onshape just does to kind of unclutter the screen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this rectangle into a 3D shape. Now, there's a variety of tools for doing that. We're going to go over all of them eventually in time. However, I'm just going to go over the most basic one, which is called extrude. That's this guy over here. You can click on it, or you can search for it. But we're going to extrude. Now, what you need to do is specify a region to extrude. When you first start out here, all of the settings here, it'll be on solid and it'll be on new. That's fine. Those defaults are what we want. Don't mess with surface. Don't mess with these other ones. I'll explain what those do here in a second. You'll notice there's a box here that's highlighted blue. That means it wants us to click on something. So what you have to do is select a region. And a region is basically like a closed-in area that's closed in by some outlines, right? So let's just select this region here. And you'll notice, boom, a box appears. Now there's this little arrow here. I can click and drag on this, push it back and forth, and it'll change length. And that's kind of a direct modeling tool. That's great. But I probably have some specific dimension that I want this to be. So let's go back to our dialog here. There's a few different modes here. We're not going to talk about what these do here in a second, but blind is basically what you want. Blind is basically just a distance. You can press these arrows here to flip which direction it extrudes, or you can drag the arrow. But let's go into this depth field and type in 4, and it'll be 4 inches by default. You can type equations into this box as well. This is basically just a dimension like it is in a sketch. And you'll notice as I type into this box, this resized. I can also, there's some more complicated options. Symmetric would extrude equal amounts on the front and back sides. We don't want that. We're going to just extrude out the front. And there's a bunch of other options here. You can kind of mess with yourself and figure out what they do. It's pretty obvious because whenever you do something, it will show up on screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to click OK. Now I mentioned you can create a sketch on any surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another sketch. We are going to click the sketch tool, click this front face, and now we're in the sketch environment. I'm going to go to the front view to view what we're doing here. Now we're going to create a second rectangle. So I'm going to go up and click rectangle. I'm not going to attach it to anything. I'm just going to place it down like this. And I'm going to show you how disregard this. I'm going to show you how to dimension things kind of more relative to each other. So I'm going to hit escape, exit out of the rectangle tool, select the dimension tool. And then what I want to do is I want to define kind of a set offset off of each of these sides. And there's faster ways to do this, but I'm not going to go into those right now. So I'm just going to kind of do it the brute force way, which is just to dimension between each of these. Now, actually, I should back up and kind of clarify something. If I do the dimension tool and I click on this line, you'll notice there's no dimension showing up. I still selected that. It still knows that I want to dimension that, but because this this line here is part of this block and it's not actually part of the sketch, it won't let you dimension it because it's dimensioned by something else. It's controlled by something else. So I've already clicked on this line, so I'm going to click on this line, and it'll let me create a dimension between them. I'm going to just set this to 0.25 inches and press enter, and then I'm just going to go around and do that for each of them. Oops. Yeah, I should have done that so fast. If you need to edit a dimension, you can just double click on it. I should have covered that earlier. So double click 0.25, press enter, and it will update. And so this is kind of that parametric behavior that we mentioned before. So if I click, place the text down, type in the number I want, and then press enter. Click, and you notice that I'm putting the text in the middle. It's kind of overlapping with the arrows a little bit, but I'm just trying to keep these uncluttered. You could place the text out here like this. Whatever looks best, just keep it clean. That's the key thing. Okay, I'm going to exit out of the sketch, and then we're going to go back and we're going to do another extrusion. So press the extrude tool button, select the region, and you'll see, we start getting this smaller block. There's a few different things you can do here. You'll notice it switched from, we're on the still solid. We're not going to mess with surfaces at all in the class. That's a whole different thing on its own. Everything we're messing with is solids. You'll notice it didn't click the new tab. It's on the add tab. So basically what the new tab does is it creates a new part. That's pretty easy to understand. You'll see down here in this list we talked about last week, it shows the parts that we create. If we go to add, there's only one part. It's the part that we already created. But if we go to new, it creates instead of adding to this first part, it creates a new separate part. And that's pretty straightforward. I think that's pretty intuitive for everybody. New creates a new part, adds to an existing part, but essentially they do the same thing, right? It's creating a solid block out of this rectangular perimeter by pulling it out towards you. Now, something that we're going to go over in a little more detail here in a second is this merge scope box. This is pretty important. But the key thing is, if we're adding to something, Onshape needs to know what you're adding to, right? If you've got a whole bunch of parts in this part studio, or you got a whole bunch of stuff out here, and you want to add to one part, you need to make sure that it's adding to the correct part and it's not adding to a different part. And so this merge scope basically tells you what to add to. And you can see it auto selects part one. It's usually pretty good at auto selecting stuff, but you will need to change this. And we'll go over how that works here in a second. So there's also another tab here called remove. And this is basically how you cut holes in things. You can see I can extrude through this, cut a hole in it. You can set the depth, using the blind option, or you can go click the blind drop down list and select something else, up to vertex, up to part, up to things. You can make selections to say how, you want the extrusion to extrude up to some piece of geometry. You can also do through all, which is you're going to use a lot. So these options are pretty good to get used to. You should probably just mess with them yourself and figure out what they do. It's pretty straightforward. But through all is a useful one, and blind is a useful one. And I also use up to face a lot. And up to vertex is reasonably useful, but blind, up to face, and through all are the two most common. And then remove, also you need a merge scope because you need to tell it what to cut from. And in the case of remove, it makes a lot more sense. You can actually add multiple parts, and you can cut material away from multiple parts all in one go, and you will do that frequently. And I'll show a little demonstration of how that works here in a second. We want to go back to add though, and let's just set this to like 1 inch and press enter, and then click OK or the green check, and it creates this block. So let's go create a sketch on the front face again. So I can do that by clicking sketch and then selecting the front face, or if I want to do it differently, I can select the front face and then press sketch, and you can kind of do it in reverse order, which is something to get used to as well. I go to the front view here. Let's create a rectangle. Now you can notice I can hover over this and it will create a vertical constraint up from this corner, or I can hover over here and it will create a vertical constraint as well. I want that in this case. I want the sides of this new part to be aligned to the sides of this part. So I can click here, and then I can click over here when I have this green, or this yellow dotted line, sorry. You'll notice the sides of this new rectangle are black. So the width of this rectangle is defined by the height of, or the width of this rectangle, but the height is not constrained. So we need to specify some dimensions for that. So let's just go here, select those two, do 2 inches, press enter, and then we're going to specify a gap between these. Oops, I'm pressing escape. I created this dimension here, but I don't want this. I'm going to select it and then press delete to delete it. I'm going to select this first and then this. There we go. And then I'm going to do 0.5 inches and press enter. So now I've got this block. Then we're gonna finish the sketch. We're gonna click the extrude tool. We're gonna click the region. We're gonna, I don't know, extrude it out 2 inches and press enter. I'm gonna add a feature to this actually. So what I'm gonna do now that I've created this is the power. This is the power of the kind of parametric modeling tools here. You can see over here in the feature tree, everything that we've been doing shows up. And so I can go back to any of these items here and edit them after the fact. So you can see we've got sketch 1, which is our first rectangle, then extrude 1, which is this first block, and it highlights what it does. Sketch 2 is this little offset rectangle. I'm deselecting each of these, by the way. If I keep clicking on these, they all select. So I'm selecting and then clicking in the white space, selecting and clicking in the white space. So sketch 2 is the offset one. Extrude 2 is the extrude for that same sketch. Sketch 3 is this guy up here. So if I want to edit my sketch, I can go back in and right click on this guy and hit edit, and it takes me back into the sketch environment. Everything below where I'm editing will gray out because I'm editing earlier in the kind of history of this part. And I can add stuff here. So we're going to add a circle. I'm just going to click down anywhere and just make it whatever size I want. Now, I mentioned this earlier. This little box, this little gray box, I just clicked twice, and I haven't pressed enter, I haven't pressed escape. I'm still in the circle tool, but you see these numbers here in this little box. Now, what this is doing is this is kind of a shortcut. I'm going to show you, I'm going to hit escape here. I can dimension this circle and dimension the diameter, place the text down, press 1 inch, and it's fine, right? But there's a faster way to do that. So I can select the circle tool, place down a circle, place down the second point of the circle, and then this is just waiting for me to start typing. So I can type 1.25 inches and then press enter, and it will automatically place this dimension. And I can move the dimension around after the fact, but this is just auto creates a dimension for us. It's the same thing as if you went up and created a dimension using the dimension tool, but it just does it for you. So that's super useful. That works for rectangles too. I can create a rectangle, and you can see the 2 numbers off the side. If I press here, it wants to know what the width is. Like I say 1.5, then press enter, and now it wants to know what the height is. I can press 0.75 and press enter, but no, escape out of that. But I don't want this, so I'm gonna window select and delete. I do want this circle though. So let's place some other dimensions here. So let's go dimension. I want this in the middle, so we're gonna do from the top to the midpoint, and then place down the text. It's 1 inch, and then from here to the side, I don't know, we'll make that 1.25 and then press enter. And then like this dimension's overlapping, it looks a little ugly, so I'm gonna drag it outside. That's a little cleaner. It's good to keep your dimensions organized so they're more readable. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna finish the sketch, and you'll notice there's a hole here now, which is what we want. If you didn't want that hole, if you wanted to fill that circle in, you could edit the extrusion, and under the faces and regions, you could select the whole region and it would fill in. In this case over here, if you want to remove anything from this list, you can select it and press delete, or I guess you can't. Not in the silo. I guess you just have to click the close button. So I lied. And then you can exit the tool. Let's do one more thing here. We are getting close to done. Let's create a new sketch on the top face here. Let's go to the top view. and then we'll create a circle 0.5 inches in diameter, press enter, press escape, dimension, I don't know, 0.5, click 0.5, escape, and finish the sketch. Now what we're going to do is we're going to extrude, but we want to cut. So we're going to select this region, and we're going to go to remove, and we're going to set this to through all because we want it to just go all the way through. Now you'll notice the merge scope. If I click on the merge scope box, it'll highlight blue. This is what I was talking about earlier about those boxes. If it's blue, it's currently taking input. If it's white still, it's not taking any input. So I'm going to click on the merge scope box, and you can see this hole goes all the way through. But it does not go all the way through the second part because the merge scope is just part 2, which is this guy up here. Now I actually want it to go through both parts. So if I have the merge scope box selected, I can click on the second part, and it will add this hole to the second part. And because I have through all selected, it'll always go all the way through the geometry no matter what geometry I have selected. I could also do a dimension and go switch back to blind and do a dimension or whatever for the depth of this hole, and that would work the same way. But that is basically how you specify the merge scope. And if you want to remove a part from here, you can hover over it and press the little X and do things like that. I'm going to select it again, though, because that's what I want. So then I'm going to press OK. All right, so that's kind of the basics. That's all we're going to go over for now. I am going to go over one extra little bonus thing here that I want to kind of touch on. I'm going to create a new part studio to do this, though. So I'm going to go to this plus, create a part studio, and it'll create a new tab. You'll notice you got our planes back like we did before. I'm going to hide these. Oops, hide, and then I'm going to click the front plane and click sketch. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create 2 rectangles. I'm going to create a rectangle here. And then I want the length to be 5 inches. I'm going to hit enter, and I want the height to be 1 inch. I'm going to press enter. And then I want to create another rectangle. I'm going to attach it to this corner here. And then I want the height, or I guess width, it wants width first. You can type in the width, and then I want the height to be 4 inches. And then press escape. And then you can move these dimensions around if you want to just clean this up a little bit. Make this a little more. Oops, got stuff blocking my mouse. Okay. So I'm going to finish the sketch. Now what I want to do is I want these 2 rectangles to be 2 separate parts. I want one sketch so that they're attached to each other. So like if I go into the sketch, edit, change this width, double clicked on that, press type to like 4.5 inches and press enter, this other part like moves over, right? That's a nice feature to have. And I want to do that in one sketch, and I want this to be 2 separate parts. But if I go into the extrude tool and I click both parts, it just creates one part, right? It's only creating one part. You can see there's no seam in between these parts. It's all one L-shaped block. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to exit out of that. There's a feature script for this. We installed a bunch of feature scripts last week. So if you don't have these, go back to last week's video. But if we click this drop-down list for these custom features, we want this extrude individual one, which already happens to be selected. So click on that. It'll open up a dialog box. This little dialog box is custom to the feature script. Each one will be a little different. It's asking us for sketch regions, and which is very similar to the extrude tool. But if we select these sketch regions, you'll notice there's a line between them now, and it creates 2 parts over here in the parts list. And we have all the same options, well, not all the same, but we have a lot of the same options that we had before with the actual extrude tool. In this case, blind is fine, and we want 1 inch because we want the ends of these to be square, so we're going to click OK. But this actually creates 2 parts, and you can see that by hovering over them in this parts list over here and seeing which one is which as to which one highlights when you hover over it. So that's how you add a feature script, and you'll notice the feature script actually shows up in the feature tree as a feature. Now this might be a little bit
if Onshape is your first CAD experience, then this, that is what it is, right? But if you're coming from another CAD software, this might be a little surprising to you. Other CAD software doesn't really have a feature that's at all similar to this. So this is pretty unique. And you can create your own feature scripts that generate geometry and they go in the feature tree. So it's a super powerful feature of Onshape. So we're going to go over one more thing here. In our robots, we use a lot of tubing, and so little blocks like this, you can convert these to tubes. You can just model blocks and then convert them to tubes that you would use on a robot. So this is 1 inch wide by 1 inch high by however long it is, and this one is the same. It's 1 by 1 by however long it is, and we use a lot of 1 by 1 tubing on our robots. And so there's a quick little feature for this. Or if we go back to this drop-down list and we go to the tube converter, you can only do one at a time, so we have to do this twice. We're going to start with this bottom one here. You'll notice if I click on it, it wants the body, so I click on the part, and it selects the part, and then you can see it hollows out the inside, and it adds a bunch of holes. And there's all these settings here that specify how that is done. So to start off, you can uncheck this hole pattern, and it won't put any holes. And it's just asking for the wall thickness, right? How thick is this wall? We're going to put in this box 1 divided by 16, 1/16 inch. I can press tab or whatever. And I don't want a whole pattern on this guy, so I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice it renames the part down here to tube, 1 by 1 by 4.5. That's fine. You can overwrite this name if you want it to be something else. We're going to go up here and we're going to click tube converter again, or you click the drop down and select tube converter, and we're going to click the top one. 16th wall is still fine, but let's select the hole pattern this time. There's a lot of complicated features here that I don't really want to spend a whole bunch of time explaining, but basically there's a few different default hole patterns, and this will work with 1 by 1 or 1 by 2 well. You can also do other sizes, but it might behave a little bit unexpectedly. It's primarily meant for 1 by 1 and 1 by 2. You can change the different hole pattern presets. You can also change the spacing, change the hole size, change where it is. We can go to a different preset. Oops. And it will change what these hole patterns do. Basically, I would say go ahead and play around with these settings. Typically, we're just going to kind of do a row like this. It gets a little more interesting if you make this 2 by 1. So we can even do that. We can even go into our sketch, edit, change this dimension to 2 inches. Click OK. It'll update. You can see the whole pattern changed. Tube converter to, right click edit, and we can change this. So play around with that a little bit. As we do some projects a little later on, we will use this a little bit more, and I'll explain kind of exactly what we want to do in that dialog to get the desired result. But for now, that's how the tube converter works. And then you would continue modeling. You can model brackets and whatever you need to continue designing your structure. But this is how you would model a tube on a robot, and it's super fast because you don't have to go in and cut out this interior part. So that's all we've got for this week. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know. I will see you next week.